All right, we've been getting a lot of soccer players in the gym kind of lately, so over the past year or so. I want to do a quick video about how my thoughts on training soccer players, because it might be similar to what a lot of training places do. It might go against the grain a little bit. But just like any other athlete, when they come in, we got to make sure they're hitting our standards for our general physical preparedness or GPP programs. So we actually have two levels of GPP. Here's one of them. If you notice along the side, there's standards. So we like to see them hit those standards. So it doesn't really matter what sport they play. So we're talking about soccer players right now. But so a soccer player comes in, we need them to hit those standards on level 1. If they're kind of beyond level 1 already, then we need to hit the standards on level 2. And then from there, we have some standards, general standards, a level 3, but those aren't as set in stone. We could use those kind of and direct them towards the sports that they play and where they're at physically. So that's where we're going to start. Now, from what I've seen a lot of with soccer players is most of them are going to come in and they're going to be most of them come in and they're pretty weak. So it's not like it's different than like if you think about some sports, the kids come in, they're actually kind of strong, but they might be tight. They don't jump enough, so they're not explosive. But usually soccer players are going to come in, they're going to be relatively weak. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that they're up to par with their strength levels. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean they have to have huge numbers lifting wise, but they need to have good numbers for their body weight, pound for pound. So I always think about the strength. It's cool to see big numbers, but it's also more important that they're pound for pound strong, right? So if, let's say a girl, she's a soccer player, she's 120 pounds. If she squats 245 pounds, that's twice her body weight. It's not as cool as the 250-pound guy squatting 500, right? That looks cooler, but still double the body weight, and that's what we're looking for, right? So we have different numbers for different exercises on that type of stuff, but all in all, most of the time, soccer players are going to come in, they're going to be relatively weak. The boys are going to be too thin. Usually the girls aren't too thin, they're just kind of weak, especially in the upper body. They have strong thighs, typically, but their hamstrings are lacking their hamstrings, glutes, lower backs. Upper body is typically pretty weak. And now we don't need to have massive upper bodies, because remember, if a sport like soccer, it's a lot of running, it's a lot of endurance, so it's sprinting and it's also like speed endurance, right? So it's not just sprint and rest like track or football. It's going to be more of like sprint, jog. So it's important that they have a little bit of endurance there, and they have to be able to move their bodies. So they don't need to be massive in their upper body, but they need to have some strength in their upper body. They need to be able to do really good. I like them to be able to do really good push-ups, really good dips, really good chin-ups. Okay, all these things, just being able to move their body weight. Sometimes you have to build up their upper backs a little bit more, but for the most part, that's what we're looking at for upper body. And then lower body, like I said, hamstrings, glutes, lower backs, calves, and anterior tibialis. So a lot of soccer players come in, they have a lot of shin problems, so they need to get stronger around their ankles. They've had ankle injuries, a lot of them, so toe raises and heel raises, different variations of them. And usually that's like in the beginning, those are the things. Once they get through general physical preparedness, we're looking to build those areas up. Their quads are usually pretty strong, but a lot of times they're strong, but they're limited in the range of motion. They're really tight through the hip flexors and through their quads. So stretching, a lot of couch stretches, a lot of hip flexor stretches, and I've just done videos on that in the past. You could look that up. Also, taking them through a little bit more full range of motion. So we do what's called, that we got from the ATG program, some guys that I've followed. So they do split squats with their knee going way past their toe to open up their hips and just to get a fuller range, and that instead of just like lunge walks. So a lot of these girls have done some type of training before, and the boys too, but it's usually just really basic stuff, and they've gotten tight through the quad. Their quads are developed, but they're tight because they're doing shorter range of motion stuff. What else here? In terms of conditioning, I usually stay away from a lot of conditioning with them because they're getting beat up in practice with conditioning. A lot of the times that's they do their skill work and their practice, and just playing soccer in general is a lot of running around. So they don't really need more of that. A lot of times, a big problem is a lot of times athletes come in, the parents come in, and the coaches, and they think that they need more of what they're already doing a ton of. That's not really what they need. So if they're doing a ton of running, we don't really need to do much more running. They might need some speed training. So I found with a lot of like team sport athletes, which includes soccer, they don't hit top speed that often. So they're not like all out top speed. When I think about that, I think about like a 40-yard dash, 100 meters in track out of the blocks. Those are like top speed. You're running against the clock type of things. So team sport athletes a lot of times don't really get that in their sport. So in order to get faster, they need to do that. You see what I'm saying? They don't need to do it with like little short rest periods. They actually need to do it like all out against the clock, racing other people, and then rest. That's how they're going to get faster. If they do need conditioning, you could definitely build up endurance conditioning with things other than running. So like I like to do sleds for that. I like to do power walks for that to build up more of the posterior because they're already quad dominant for soccer players. I like to do a lot of carries because their upper bodies are typically going to be a little weak, and that'll get a little bit more upper body endurance work. Wheelbarrows. So we could do those for more extended distances for soccer athletes if they need to work on conditioning and endurance. But most of the time, they're actually very fit. They just need to get faster. They need to get stronger. And a lot of times getting stronger in the right spots will in turn make them faster. Yesterday I was working with a baseball player, he had kids in college. I've trained him for years. He's never really done any speed training, but recently he's really dialed in his training. We've really brought up a lot of his weaknesses. His lifts are going, I'm really happy with his lifts. He's jumping a lot higher, and I went outside, had him run a couple sprints, and he was ripping them. And I want to get the clock on him because it's crazy how fast he is without really even doing any sprinting. I'm not saying all athletes are in that boat where they don't need to sprint to get faster, because some do. But that just goes to show you what good strength training, a good training program will do. Especially if you're doing a lot of jumping, which a lot of high school kids don't really do a lot of jumping at their high school, so that's one thing they need to do. So again, just to tie it all together, once we go through general physical preparedness, then we get into our training and we try to bring up squats, deadlifts, things like that. We try to build a posterior chain up typically, stretching them out more through their hips. So when I say posterior chain, I'm saying calves, hamstrings, glutes, lower backs, and their shins for their ankles. Jump training. So we're going to do a lot of jumping with all of our athletes, but for soccer, more in terms of running. So we're going to do a lot of more vertical type jumping, single leg jumping, reactive jumps. Okay, so all those types of things could have a place for a soccer player. And then we typically stay away from conditioning too much, but all of our athletes warm up with sleds. So that's like, the average athlete that comes in here is just fried just from the warm up. So we do a lot of sled work. Our athletes typically don't have a problem with conditioning, but if they do, we could add more of that type of stuff in. And then speed training would be just all out sprints on a timer, maybe racing other people, because a lot of times they don't get that when they're playing soccer. It's more like you're running across the field, you're standing still, you're walking, you're jogging, and it's more like that type of thing. So they could get a lot of benefit from actually racing and racing against the clock and things like that with a full rest period. And that's it. Of course, always a lot of abs. All athletes need a ton of abs. Soccer players are no different. They're just like all the other athletes that come in the gym, and typically the programs they've been doing don't have abs in them. And what I've also seen a lot of times is a lot of the soccer athletes come in and they've done some type of training with their teams. So they've only taken their training so far, because in a team atmosphere, a team setting, it's very difficult to train the best players and the worst players. Everything's just kind of middle of the road type of stuff. So they've done a lot of basic stuff, but they haven't taken their training to the next level typically in terms of strength training. So that's what we're looking at for soccer players. If you have any questions, let me know. Comment, send me a message, whatever you need to do.